For 10 years, Tony Blair was Britain's Prime Minister, leading Labour to 3 consecutive majority governments. That put him at the heart of some of his government's most celebrated decisions and some of its most controversial.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world.
He knows what power is like. He's been out of 10 Downing Street since 2007, but not out of the loop, staying in touch with some of the world's top leaders. We sat down to discuss what appears to be a developing new world order. A lot of people seem to be very worried about Donald Trump as President of the United States. Are you worried?
Look, it's been an extraordinary time, hasn't it? And for those of us on the other side of the pond who've just lived through Brexit, now we've had another political earthquake. So, I won't pretend to you I wasn't surprised by what has happened over this past period, because I am.
So you think there's been perhaps a bit of knee-jerk reaction to the fear that's been expressed?
It's, this is the most powerful political position in the world, and we want the person who occupies it to be doing the right things, not just for America, but for the rest of the world. And I think the thing is as well, you've got to understand why these movements are happening. That there are people left behind by globalization who don't feel they've got a place in this new world, and someone who comes and articulates their concerns and their anxieties gets support. What happens is you have people with a huge sense of grievance, where their grievance is being played upon, but it's not being answered in the way it needs to be.
Played upon. Do you think their grievances have been played upon? And because obviously you're right, we're seeing this in more than just America. We saw it in Brexit. We're seeing it in a number of Western European countries.
I think the grievances are real. This is where I would disagree with some of the analysis on the left. For example, people's anxieties about immigration, certainly in my country and in Europe, they're real. Particularly if you've got large numbers of refugees coming, for example, from Syria because of the civil war there. People also worry about the security aspects of that. So these are genuine fears. Now, how you respond to them is then the question. But I don't think you can dismiss them as...
How do you respond to them? On that point, on immigration?
You have to accept that immigration is a real concern for people, but the answer is to have rules but not prejudices. In other words, what people fear about immigration, who are completely reasonably minded, who are not bigots or prejudiced, what they fear is that this is happening without proper control and without proper oversight. Now,
and is it?
In some cases it is. Look, if you're going to a Greek island and you're then got a pathway into Europe, I don't think we can be sure of the integrity of the systems for evaluating those cases and so on. So in some cases, yes, it is justified.
Let me remind you of something you said about immigration, and it would have been in the 2005 campaign, as you headed towards re-election. I never want this to be an issue that divides our country, that sets communities against each other. It is the duty of government to deal with the issues of both asylum and immigration, but they should not be exploited by a politics that, in desperation, seeks refuge in them, that we never use these issues as a political weapon, an instrument of division and discord. Is that what we've witnessed here, that it has been used as a political weapon?
Yeah, I don't know. I think undoubtedly, particularly in the European context, I would say for sure. It's the simplest way to get a political party to a certain level of support in any set of opinion polls anywhere in Europe right now.
What about in the States?
And in the States,
just witnessed?
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely. If people feel that their communities and their societies are being changed without them almost being part of the debate about it and without them being engaged, then they will feel angry and fearful. And someone who comes along and says to them, right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop it all. That then has appeal. So if the centre does not act in a strong, coherent way to say, yes, we understand, we're listening, but here's an answer to your problem, then there will be people who come along and can exploit and develop that anger and turn it into a very powerful political movement.
I hear you on what the centre needs to do, but meanwhile, what appears to be the right is on the march.
Yep.
And people are trying to gauge what happened in some of these countries, and certainly what happened last week. Was it populism? Was it nationalism? Was it fascism? I mean, where do you go?
Yeah, fascism, I think it's very important we don't get ahead of ourselves here. Populism for sure. You know, there are obviously whole societies or parts of society that feel left behind by globalization, right? The right way to protect people against the dangers of globalization, the displacement effects of it, is education, it's infrastructure. It's building the social capital in order to make sure that people can handle this era of change. It's not trying to tell somebody, you know, in a seaside town of the UK that the way of protecting themselves against globalization is to throw some immigrant guy out of a job in London. I mean, this is not going to protect us.
One of the leaders, the self-proclaimed leader of the Brexit movement, Mr. Farage, claims that we have seen the end of Blairism, we've seen the end of Bushism, and we've seen the end now of Clintonism, and he claims some credit for that. Have we seen the end of those three?
I don't know whether you've seen the end of the three individuals, but the philosophy, no, of course not. These guys are like Nigel Farage. Their view of Britain is Britain outside Europe, shutting the door to immigrants. It's a sort of quasi-nationalistic policy, even around the economy. It won't work, and it's totally contrary to the values and spirit that a country like Britain needs for the 21st century. 21st century belongs to the open-minded. Right? Why is Canada a great country? It's because as a country, the spirit of the country is one of openness to the world.
But those tensions are playing out in Canada right now as well.
Yeah, and they will do. But they haven't disrupted the country in the same way, and I hope they don't.
Does it concern you that over this first weekend as president-elect, Donald Trump has brought into the inner sanctum Nigel Farage to give him advice on international relations, especially as it comes to Britain and Europe?
I mean, I'm not sure how much advice has been given, but I think it's not surprising he
Well, he's there, you're not there.
No, exactly, and it's not surprising he sees someone who supported him very strongly in the campaign. I mean, I think you would expect that, you know.
The Trump relationship with Putin, how concerned are you about Russia's place in this developing world?
Every president, every prime minister wants to reset the relationship with Russia and have a good relationship. Why? Because it's a huge country, it's got a lot of interests, and if Russia's on side, the world's easier to manage. The difficulty is where Russia, for example, says in relation to Ukraine, well, we decide their future. And however much you want to reach out and have a great relationship, at some point, if you adhere to democratic values, you've got to say, well, I'm sorry, you know, we can't agree with that.
But he seems to be suggesting that the fight against ISIS is all that matters right now to America, and if it means leaving Assad alone, if it means forgetting about Crimea, then that's okay.
Yeah, but the trouble is, you know, what you find with Syria is if the price of that is Assad stays in power, then he's going to be staying in power with the largest majority of the population thinking that's completely unacceptable. It's not going to work. Likewise, with Crimea, okay, I mean, I think the world's come to terms with Crimea.
It's come to terms with Crimea?
I think probably it has. I think that's the reality. Okay, but...
So stop fighting that issue?
Well, the world has stopped fighting that issue, by the way. But the point I'm making to you is whether it's fighting ISIS or you know, making sure that you keep the world stable, you're making sure you don't have nuclear proliferation. The Russia relationship's fantastically important. All I'm saying is many of us have tried to put that in the right frame and have found you come to a point where the choices you're being asked to make are very hard.
Trump says that, or said during the campaign, that Clinton and Obama created ISIS. They said, hey, wait a minute, ISIS was created because of Al-Qaeda, which was created because of the invasion of Iraq. You know that story all too well.
Right, I do.
Now, do you accept any blame for the eventual formation of ISIS?
Look, I'm always going to accept responsibility for the decision we took to remove Saddam. I just point out that ISIS was beaten in Iraq in 2010. It was the Arab Spring, what happened in Syria, that allowed it back off the ground again, coupled with the sectarianism of the Maliki government. But, you know, you can go on and argue about the causes of ISIS. You know, if you get rid of ISIS, you're still going to have a score of other terrorist groups you're going to have to deal with. If you get rid of those, you've still got the basic fundamental problem, which is that out of the Middle East has come an ideology based on a perversion of religion, this Islamist philosophy. And yes, you can defeat groups like ISIS, but you won't defeat the problem.
You're in a unique position. You've been in the room. You've had to make tough decisions, sending a country to war, making difficult decisions about, economics. When you look at the new president of the United States, do you see someone who has had no political experience, no military experience? Does it worry you that he now will be making those kind of decisions from the pulpit of the most powerful leader in the world?
The experience issue doesn't worry me because he's had plenty of experience of real life and taking decisions and running things.
But he does have a record. He has said things.
Yeah, no, I'm not, but we're here, this is where we are today. Okay, so let's wait and see. My concern is more with politics and what the whole thing says about the political situation that we've got. And if you don't get that centre vibrant and strong and radical so that it's creating the change that people really want to see, okay, if it's not in that position, you'll find these insurgent movements just throwing out the established order. And, I think we are only at the beginning of this populist surge. We're not anywhere near through it or at the end of it.
That's quite something to say.
Well, I think that's probably true. And my only fear about it is that sometimes you've got to live through something to realize what's wrong with it.
Tony Blair had a lot more to say. You can see our full conversation when it airs this weekend on One on One.